Hi, Addsure followers, and welcome to another exciting YouTube explainer video. Today, we're very privileged to have online with us Monique and Alistair from PKF Octagon. They are well-known auditors in the sectional title and community scheme realm. So just a welcome and thank you, Monique and Alistair, for your time. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves so our audience knows what we're doing here today?
Yeah, so thank you, Candice. So, PKF Octagon is based in Johannesburg. We are auditors. We're in the mid-tier region, so we basically do auditing, accounting, tax, secretarial. Auditing is a big line for us, but tax and accounting goes hand in hand. So we like a one-stop shop, to be honest.
And then I think coupled with that, Monique and I obviously have our specialist community scheme division. So we obviously take care of sectional title schemes, homeowners associations, lifestyle estates, really anything connected to that space, service providers, etc., etc. Yeah.
Excellent, because I know sometimes it's quite difficult for managing agents to source auditors who want to deal with community schemes because there's so much around. It's not just the auditing, it's all the compliance and everything that goes hand in hand with that nowadays. So that's great. That's
often just to add in there, Candice, it's not necessarily complicated, but it is a niche environment, and your auditor needs to understand the complexities of that industry. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I also think so, and I think a lot of it gets overlooked until time of audit, and then we get delays, and then the AGMs are late, and I know now we're crazy onto AGM season, and we're going to come up to February year ends, and we're going to have more AGMs. So what we thought about is just helping our managing agent clients. Just sort of one of the aspects that make up the books would be the expenses. It's an important aspect, and I think also from our side in terms of insurance, sometimes we do see as part of claim submissions invoices that might not, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So surely that would have a role to play in terms of auditing. So I wanted to chat to you guys today about specifically expenses, audit, invoicing, and how it impacts you guys as auditors. Like, what is the most common issue that you come across in community schemes when it comes to looking at the expenses that go through?
Candice, I think before we delve into that specific impact, and I'll let Monique jump in a little bit on that, just to backtrack with specific reference to you as insurance brokers, this is a huge problem, and we do see this across many managing agents, and it is sort of rife in the industry. We will get at audit time a trial balance that has a line item called insurance control. It's usually a huge figure. There's money coming in and going out of that account, but it's never reconciled. Obviously, then it arrives on our desks, and we make the inquiry. Well, who is owed what at the end of the year? What supplier needs to be paid? Are there outstanding claims? And that is usually, as you mentioned, can cause delays. That is usually a huge point of delay, and there's often, or very often, not a clear link between the claim that's been made, who has been paid, the unit that's involved. You have excess floating around in there too, which is, we'll touch on that later. It's not correctly treated. So yes, the insurance it's a very relevant part of our audit, and unfortunately, it's usually not in a good state.
Coming from a managing agent side, I know that the insurance part is often so overlooked, and that's, like you say, Alistair, it's an in and an out and an in and an out, and it should get to zero at the end of the month.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of like left to the side. So now sitting on the broker side, having had some clients who are the managing agents coming to us and saying, about a year ago, there was a claim that got paid out. What was that about? And yeah, I definitely think that can make your jobs particularly difficult, and you're under pressure to get these audits out, and you're dealing with claims that are 12 months old or
correct,
coming from the previous year.
Correct.
Like, what kind of tips can you help them with then on how to manage this?
So I think on that side, I think it's just that you can probably talk a bit better about it. Maybe just
Yeah, I think, Candice, the invoice detail, absolutely. I think clarity on invoices, specifically where insurance claims are concerned. If the claim is not, I don't want to say common property related, but the more specific the invoice can be in terms of detail that you can trace that back to a claim, the easier it is for, number one, the managing agent to reconcile those accounts. And secondly, if there's still an issue that has been overlooked, easier for us to reconcile. I think possibly to look, depending, obviously, if the scheme has numerous claims, we would obviously test on a sample basis. But if there's some sequence to the filing, and the claim, the invoice relating to the supplier is attached to the claim, and you can clearly see what the claim relates to. Is it a plumbing claim? Is it a electrical claim? And there's excess involved, we can allocate accordingly. This is another line item that we often see is excess. And I will say to the managing agent, there is no such thing. Yes, there is excess, we understand, but the excess that's borne by the scheme, it's an expense. So it should be allocated to electrical repairs or to plumbing. There's no such line item as excess. It was incurred for a particular expense item, and that's where it should be allocated.
Okay, and then I'll just talk about what we are seeing, just with regards to the most common mistakes, if I can call it that. We are basically seeing misallocations. So if I say misallocations, it would be, for instance, repairs and maintenance that's added or that's allocated to insurance, for instance. It would be payments. It would be, for instance, two, or maybe if it's a bulk payment for insurance, the whole payment is insurance and it's not allocated for the period. I don't know if that makes sense.
The duplicate payments, also, just to jump in there, that's often for us, it's an internal control weakness. There's a processing there's no system in place to capture a duplicate invoice number. It could be 1 space 2, and the same invoice is entered as 1 2 without the space. There's no safety net, so these things get through the system and invoices are paid twice because there's no protocol for capturing invoice numbers.
No,
yeah.
I think the biggest one that we're seeing is the net allocation. So, for instance, instead of showing income and expenses and expenses, we are seeing income less expenses, and we're seeing the net line.
The net, and as we know, anything that's charged has to be recorded per the Act as an income line item. So an extra additional audit journal where we need to go and reallocate.
Yeah.
I think those are predominantly, I think, those with regards to expenses and what we see at face value. That's a big. Those three are probably the biggest, the most obvious. Yeah.
And you mentioned the fact that if there was a correct protocol in place, so I would imagine that a managing agent's protocol would come down to certain basics like the supplier. So would they be creating a supplier for a specific insurance payment? Maybe it's related to a claim, or maybe some of the invoices don't actually have invoice numbers, so it sort of falls short on whatever their protocol is. Because our main goal is to try and help our clients to help their clients. So I would kind of see that whichever supplier that they are using for common claims or anything like that, there should be some kind of standard that they need to, invoice accordingly. What are the sort of basic things that managing agents should look out for on their supplier invoices so that they don't run into duplicate payments and that they can actually build their own protocol around that?
Yeah, so I think there's just one thing I want to add there. So if a payment is done, maybe it would be a good protocol to say that a payment is done on invoice and not on quote. If the supplier is wanting a quote to be done,
a quote or statement.
A quote or statement, yes. it's just a good control to say rather send us an invoice and let's pay on invoice. I think a quote and statement could influence the process a bit.
And then Candice, I think obviously also on that, the key things to look for on that invoice, very important. I think even before it gets to the invoice stage, assuming it's not a new supplier, is the whole process of onboarding that supplier into your system to prevent, to make sure that it's not a fraudulent transaction or a fictitious supplier. There are definite steps that can be followed with regards to checking suppliers and procedures before funds are released.
Yeah, so probably internal processes should be in place just to make sure that these things are, like a credit check is done, for instance.
They charge VAT. It's a free, so you hop onto the SARS website, do a VAT vendor search, pop in the VAT number if they're charging you VAT to verify that they are actually VAT registered. Similarly, if it's a company that's doing the invoicing, a little bit more complicated today, but you can get a disclosure, make sure that that's an actual registered company. And then I think on the banking side of things, you can check those credentials through your business banking to make sure that the details match and that it's valid. Those are basics. Yeah.
So that would go a long way to safeguarding the managing agent when they come to do those payments, whether it be insurance-related payments or it's their normal repairs and maintenance payments. If they kept those basic checks and balances in place, then it would go a long way to safeguarding them as well as their clients.
Correct. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily, depending on the scale, it may not be possible to do it for every single transaction, but once that supplier has been loaded and approved into your system, when there is a change of detail, and I have noticed that most people today, when they do update banking details, they will send you a bank stamped letter saying, please take note, we've changed our banking details. So you can at that stage re-verify that information without I would never do it just on a face value, we've changed our banking details, or you get a supply invoice and all of a sudden company name has changed, the banking details have changed. Those are things you can absolutely should be checked. And of course, I think the big one, which we've probably missed, is not for your recurring payments. I'm not if you have a security contract with XYZ, where that's a contractual amount every month, those are relatively speaking more safe. But any ad hoc invoice that comes in, particularly if it's up for a large value, make sure the trustee approvals are there. Make sure someone has signed off on that work before you just release funds to anyone. Yeah.
What are the alarm bells that you have come across? Let's say like now you've got a sample that you're looking at for ABC Body Corporate. What are some of the alarm bells that say to you, I've got to check this payment further or bring it to the attention of the trustees, for example? Like, what are those kind of red flags?
The red flags is if the descriptions are wrong. So if we look at the invoice and we look at the description in the GL, that would be a red flag to me as an auditor, because why is the description wrong? Misallocation. So for instance, if you allocate, once again, insurance to repairs and maintenance, why are you allocating it incorrectly? If the amount is wrong, so if the invoice is saying 500 rand and the person went and captured 1,000 rand, that would be a red flag to me.
I think also, if you're talking samples, picking up invoices where you have potentially a different body corporate name, this does happen. Schemes, expenses are erroneously paid from one scheme by another. Not often, but it does happen. As Monique, possibly you get an invoice for something which would not ordinarily occur in the running of a body corporate. There may be an expense item which it shouldn't be here.
Yeah, so for motor vehicles, why is there a motor vehicle body corporate, for instance?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it would be stuff like that. It would be red flags to us.
Also, I think, Monique, if we then look at, not at invoice level per se, but we've now drafted the financials, and possibly on a single invoice, we didn't pick that up, but you get to the end and there's this huge variance between what your security cost you last year and this year, it's doubled or tripled. we would go and investigate that.
Yeah.
Check the budget, obviously, to make, okay, was that planned? But if there's nothing obvious, that would be a red flag.
And also huge amounts. So we'll go through the ledgers, look for huge amounts. That would also be a red flag to us. And also investigate the huge amount, the massive material amounts.
I want to maybe just come back to the insurance side of things. Do you find that there's a lot of hiccups when there's a lot of geezer claims that go through a body corporate? My end question would be, would it be better for an audit perspective if we minimized geezer claims and it went through the insurer's call center as opposed to running through the scheme and the banks and you've got all the various suppliers? Does it make it a bit neater in terms of the overall insurance aspect if the scheme considered a call center transaction as opposed to an on-the-ground transaction, if I can call it that?
I think, Candice, you'd probably still have, I mean, I'm just literally, you'd still have obviously some sort of reporting happening in the accounts. It possibly could make a difference. I feel, again, this really comes down to tightening of the way these matters are handled and accounted for internally. If there possibly was a monthly or a bi-monthly, a quarterly reconciliation process of those insurance control accounts, because as you said at the beginning of the call, it really should always come back to zero. This is the expense, this is what the insurer is prepared to pay out. The balance is either an expense to be recovered from the owner or an expense of the body corporate. So that account should always come back to zero. So the tighter the controls are around that, the cleaner and easier the audit is. Not to mention monthly accounts. I mean, we see it at the end, post-financial year. But even for monthly reporting, chairman packs that go out, it's just cleaner and neater and everything's where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think from an auditing perspective, we look for audit trails, we look for evidence. So if there's evidence, that makes our job easier. If there's no evidence, so I don't know if that also helps you with your answer, then it's problematic and it's a red flag to us again.
Okay. And then in regards to suppliers, let's say we do have some of our suppliers watching our YouTube channel. Is it wise to do an invoice handwritten or on a spreadsheet with minimal details? Like how should the actual contractors up their game so that they actually do the invoicing correctly? Like, do you have any tips for them?
So I think if it's accounting software that's used, it's more professional. Firstly, handwritten invoices. As an auditor, I sometimes like,
in 2023 anyway. Yes,
I sometimes wonder. I mean, you do get those small subcontractors that still comes in and do a writing invoice. It's perfectly fine, in a sense, but it has to have certain things on it. So in terms of the VAT Act, there are certain things to check for. So, for instance, that if it's an invoice about 5,000 rand, it has to have the VAT number of both entities on it. So the subcontractor, I don't know if
or the contractor and the body corporate,
yes,
regardless. I mean,
regardless of whether they registered for VAT or not. The addresses of both entities. Detailed descriptions must be on there.
Dates, invoice numbers, sequential, obviously, yes, invoice numbers.
Invoice numbers must have the name VAT invoice or
the value, either with the VAT separately shown or the wording inclusive of VAT. There's actually a for your suppliers, again, if they just hop onto the SARS website, there's a very handy little checklist available there for invoices under 5,000 Rand and invoices above 5,000. So if it's above 5, there's 7 compulsory items that need to go on there, and if it's under 5,000, 5 compulsory items. So that's a quick click, get the list, make sure your invoices are compliant. And again, that similar is also great for managing agents, loading, or if they're doing ad hoc checks, taking on suppliers for the first time, do their invoices meet these requirements? If not, ask them to amend and send you back a corrected invoice.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't actually know that that was even available.
Mm.
That's awesome for our managing agent viewers and our contractor viewers. Thank you. That's great. So anything else that would make your life as an auditor easier when it comes to expenses on a scheme related basis?
I can, this is very practical. Look, things have changed a lot with technology, because a lot of our, you obviously have platforms that are used today where the vouchers are embedded in the program. Historically, I think you'd get your monthly surplus report, is what they used to be called, and then you'd have a stack of invoices attached to the back of that, which is fine. It just, to me, it's a lengthier way of having to review things. I often, maybe a little bit old schooly things, if you have a supplier file, voucher file, I think we touched on that word voucher earlier on, Candice. It's just easier for me personally if things are filed alphabetically. So if I'm checking XYZ security services, I can literally go to XYZ and I can check all 12 months. Whereas if I have to page through a file where everything's been filed monthly and and then the invoice hasn't been filed, and because it's not filed in the monthly order, there's inevitably 1 or 2 invoices missing. Those all delay the process. So the more, if you are still using a manual filing system, the more methodical that is, the quicker it is for us to work through that.
And also, just to add to that, sometimes they fall in terms of that invoice date, and sometimes they fall in terms of payment. So it's, as the auditor, you have to think of all these, look at how
where to go and look.
Where to go and look. So maybe alphabetical order is better, like Alistair was saying. For me as an auditor also, I like seeing signatures. So I like seeing the signature of some trustee, or either on the invoice or the payment. That to me shows to me that it was authorized. So
this is, of course, manual system.
Manual system, yes. Yeah. If we talk about manual system, if we talk about an electronic system, I still find that people are still printing, especially when the payment is done. They're still doing the payments. They're still printing the invoice, and sometimes the trustee or the person in charge would still sign. It's just a double check to say that it went through the proper authorization process.
Obviously, again, I think negated when date approval is done online, which we still see a combination of both. We deal with obviously the ones where the approvals are built into the system, but I have to say at the same time that is, we still do see a lot of paperwork.
We do. Especially, I think, for the smaller entities.
Absolutely, the smaller agents,
Yes.
Yeah, not everyone's online or, picked up on that yet. So we've got to, while we still have this in between, we've got to do a bit of both. So hopefully the hard copy vouchers or invoices that as we were saying, marry with the electronic system, so that you guys have the same system to actually go through, whether it be paper or electronic.
The other thing, Candice, and I know this is, your reporting is obviously, it's meant to be a pool basis. That's another thing we find is often come year end, yes, pay on invoice, make sure your invoices are compliant. But we find very often, this is again, if you don't have 12 months that you can quickly check, there are payments that have been missed and there's never a reconciliation. And I understand the difficulty because we are dealing with, the manager has multitude of schemes to look after. But a quick check, maybe where things are not debit orders that for a fact they're going off every month, there's never, or very often not, a reconciliation back to a supplier statement at year end, which we are careful about and do check to make sure that there's not been a duplicate payment because the invoice number has been entered twice, or invoices haven't been entered and you're sitting with accruals at year end that haven't been accounted for. So that's also something I think there's room for improvement as far as supplier reconciliations are concerned. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we could have an installment number 2.
Lots to talk about,
Yeah, lots and lots to talk about. So just from the insurance side of things, I can say that I don't think everybody does a reconciliation, and then when it gets to year end and they're getting questions from the auditors, then there's this mad panic about, well, can you find the claim? Thank goodness we if you're an Addsure client, we can help you with any claim that's gone through. So that's a bonus. But if you're not an Addsure client, you actually have to hope that somebody's got all the claim documents so that we can help you answer the questions. So, yeah. Well, thanks very much, Alistair and Monique, for your time and for sharing some very interesting facts. I didn't know anything about that on SAR's website at all. So I think that will be a very handy thing for our clients. And good luck with the year-end audits that you have and the upcoming February year ends.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.